Welcome to the Battle of the Presidents, where we will learn about the first 5 presidents and decide who is the best. I'm Mr. Klein here with Mr. Mitchell, and we will begin walking through the presidency of James Madison in this episode. James Madison was an American statesman, diplomat, expansionist, philosopher, and founding father who served as the 4th president of the United States from 1809 to 1817. He is hailed as the father of the Constitution for his pivotal role in drafting and promoting the Constitution of the United States and the United States Bill of Rights. He co-wrote the Federalist Papers, co-founded the Democratic-Republican Party, and served as the 5th United States Secretary of State from 1801 to 1809.
In 1808, Democratic-Republican James Madison was elected president, and he faced the difficulty of continuing an unpopular trade war which had begun by Thomas Jefferson. He also felt growing pressure from the war hawks. By 1812, he decided that Congress must vote on war. Speaking to Congress, Madison blasted Great Britain's conduct. He asked Congress to decide on how the nation should respond. When Congress voted a few days later, the war hawks won. The first time in the nation's brief history, Congress had declared war.
I didn't say it, I declared it.
Months later, Americans elected Madison to a second term. He would serve as the commander-in-chief during the War of 1812.
In the summer of 1812, the United States found itself in a war with one of the world's most powerful nations. Despite the claims by the war hawks, the War of 1812 would not be a quick and easy fight. When the war began, the British Navy had hundreds of ships. In contrast, the U.S. Navy had fewer than 20 ships. None of them was as powerful as the Great British warships.
Most of the British Navy ships, however, were scattered around the globe. Although small, the U.S. Navy had well-trained sailors and powerful new warships, such as the USS Constitution. American vessels defeated British ships several times in one-on-one duels. Such victories embarrassed the British and raised American morale. Eventually, the British ships blockaded American seaports.
American leaders hoped to follow up victories at seas with an overland invasion of Canada. 3 attacks were planned, from Detroit, from the Niagara Falls, and from up the Hudson River Valley toward Montreal. The attack from Detroit failed when British soldiers and Indians led by Tecumseh captured Fort Detroit. The other American attacks failed when state militia troops refused to cross the Canadian border, arguing that they did not have to fight in a foreign country.
In 1813, the United States went on attack again. A key goal was to break Britain's control of Lake Erie. The Navy gave the task to Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry. After building a small fleet, Perry sailed out to meet the British on September 10th, beginning the Battle of Lake Erie. The battle ended when the British surrendered. Perry sent a message to General William Henry Harrison. "We have met the enemy, and they are ours." Perry's brilliant victory forced the British to withdraw, giving the U.S. Army control of the lake and New Hope.
What is it they've sent us?
Hope.
With American control of Lake Erie established, General Harrison marched his army into Canada. At the Battle of Thames River in October 1813, he defeated a combined force of British troops and Native Americans. Harrison's victory ended British power in the Northwest. Tecumseh's death during the fighting also dealt a blow to the British alliance with Native Americans in the region, and also set off the crazy curse at Tippecanoe. If you believe in that kind of thing, look it up. It's cray-cray.
Insane, man. This chat telling him how insane he is. So insane, man.
Meanwhile, war with American Indians erupted in the South. Creek Indians, angry at the American settlers for pushing into their lands, took up arms in 1813. A large force attacked Fort Mims on the Alabama River, destroying the fort and killing close to 250 of its defenders. In response, the commander of the Tennessee militia, Andrew Jackson, gathered about 2,000 volunteers to move against the Creek Nation.
In the spring of 1814, Jackson attacked the Creek along the Tallapoosa River in Alabama. Jackson's troop won this battle, the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. The Treaty of Fort Jackson, signed late in 1814, ended the Creek War and forced the Creek to give up millions of acres of their land. Despite U.S. success on the western and southern frontiers, the situation in the east grew worse. After defeating France in April of 1814, the British sent more troops to America.
Now reinforced, the British attacked Washington, D.C. President Madison was forced to flee when the British broke through U.S. defenses. The British set fire to the White House, the Capitol, and other government buildings. The British sailed on to Baltimore, Maryland, which was guarded by Fort McHenry. They shelled the fort for 25 hours. The Americans refused to surrender Fort McHenry. The British chose to retreat instead of continuing to fight. Inspired by the American strength at Fort McHenry, Francis Scott Key wrote the national anthem, The Star-Spangled Banner.
After the attack on Washington, the British moved against New Orleans. British commanders hoped to capture the city and thus take control of the Mississippi River. Andrew Jackson commanded the U.S. forces around New Orleans. His troops were a mix of regular soldiers, including 2 battalions of free African Americans, a group of Choctaw Indians, state militia, and pirates led by John Lafitte. The battle began on the morning of January 8, 1815. Some 5,300 British troops attacked Jackson's forces of about 4,500. The British began marching towards the U.S. defenses, but they were caught up in the open field. The British were cut down with frightening speed. More than 2,000 British soldiers were killed or wounded. The Americans, for their part, had suffered about 70 casualties. The Battle of New Orleans made Andrew Jackson a hero and was the last major conflict of the War of 1812.
Before the Battle of New Orleans, a group of New England Federalists gathered secretly at Hartford, Connecticut. At the Hartford Convention, Federalists agreed to oppose the war and send delegates to meet with Congress. Before the delegates reached Washington, however, news arrived that the war had already ended. Some critics laughed at the Federalists, and the party lost much of its political power. Slow communications at the time meant that neither the Federalists nor Jackson knew about the Treaty of Ghent. The treaty, which had been signed in Belgium on December 24, 1814, ended the War of 1812.
Though each nation returned the territory it had conquered, the fighting did have several consequences. The War of 1812 produced intense feelings of patriotism among many Americans for having stood up to the mighty British. The war also broke the power of many Native American groups. Finally, a lack of goods caused by the interruption of trade boosted American manufacturing.
Those are the highlights of the major events that took place while Madison was president. Most of his presidency was surrounded by the War of 1812 and how we dealt with it as a nation. So where do you think Madison stacks up against the other presidents? Join us next time where we will take an in-depth look at our 5th president, James Monroe, in Battle of the Presidents.